So it's my job to talk to you a little bit about chronic diseases that are associated with food packaging chemicals. And as we've already heard, humans are exposed to chemicals from a huge variety of sources, and many of these chemicals end up in our food, either because they're introduced during production, during food processing, or because they're actually found in the ultimate food packaging. So I am trained as a developmental biologist and an endocrinologist. So I'm not a toxicologist, but I'm still interested in chemicals, and I'm specifically interested in chemicals that interfere with how hormones act in our body. My particular interests are chemicals that mimic the actions of estrogens, but there's a whole host of these chemicals that do other things and that interfere with other hormones in our body. And as Pete sort of alluded to this morning, we know that hormones play a really critical role in not just the fun stuff, which my students are interested in, which is sex, but the less sexy stuff, but actual development of the embryo and the fetus. We know that exposures to these chemicals are occurring daily. Exposures are typically low, whatever we want to mean by that, whether low means part per million, billion, or trillion, but low. And most of us are not suspecting that we're being exposed to these chemicals. And I've given you a small list of the chemicals that I'm interested in. I don't have time today to talk to you about all of these chemicals, but you heard a little bit yesterday from Linda and earlier today from Pete, and you're going to hear even more in this session. I'm going to just focus really on bisphenols and one example of a benzophenone. So here's my but. I heard someone say this to me. Actually, Marisol Maffini and I were testifying at a public hearing in Boston in 2009. And a legislator said to us, but we've all been exposed to these chemicals and we're all fine. Right? And my reply was, hold on a second. We are not fine. We see that over time, the age at which girls go through puberty has decreased. We've seen with time that sperm count in men around the world has declined. We see rates of testicular cancer increasing, particularly in Scandinavian countries. We see rates of breast cancer increasing around the world over time. We see the number of children diagnosed with autism and ADHD increasing over time globally. This is not an American problem. We see increased incidence of obesity, not just in adults, but in children, including in the developing world. We see increases, not just in type 2 diabetes, which we know is a disease often of lifestyle, but also type 1 diabetes, which we thought of really as a genetic disease, but certainly has other environmental components. So we're seeing these increases in the incidence of disease over periods of time when genetics really aren't changing, right? The difference in genetics between my grandmother and me is relatively small, and yet we're seeing these increases. I am not going to tell you that all of this is due to chemicals or that all of this is due to food contact chemicals or chemicals found in our food. But I do think something environmental is going on, and chemicals is a part of that environmental message. We know from good data, from studies of laboratory animals, as well as data that is compelling from human populations, that many environmental chemicals, including chemicals found in food and food packaging, can cause diseases, chronic diseases that we worry about. Some of those, the diseases I've just told you about, as well as a whole host of other diseases I just don't have time to talk about. BPA is one of the chemicals that is under the lamppost, as we heard from Senia. We know a lot about this chemical. There are thousands of published studies on this one single chemical. And it's not just a food contact chemical, so I want us to keep in mind that a lot of these chemicals are used for other purposes. BPA is used in thermal receipt paper, which my wallet is always full of, since we're always traveling and we need our receipts for everything, right? It's also used in the medical equipment that we heard about from Pete this morning in his talk. And the effects of BPA in rodents, laboratory animals, controlled causal studies, as well as in human populations, it's well documented. In those thousands of studies, we know that BPA affects outcomes related to reproduction, the mammary gland, my favorite organ, I'm going to show you a whole bunch of things about, metabolic endpoints, and brain and behavior. We know that BPA affects those outcomes. But we also know, as Linda told us last night, that BPA is the tip of the iceberg. And that as people like you and the people you work with and represent have gotten very worried about BPA and started shouting from the rooftops, no more BPA. That instead we got BPA-free materials, BPA-free plastics, BPA-free thermal paper receipts, and we thought, hooray for us! And we didn't think, what's in it instead? And BPS is one of those replacements, I consider it a regrettable replacement, you'll see why in a second, that compared to the 1,000 studies that we have or more on BPA, we have almost nothing on BPS. What we do know is that like BPA, BPS acts like an estrogen in the body. And when the first study that showed that came out in 2013, I got a call from a reporter at Environmental Health News, and he said, Laura, I'm not a chemist, but wouldn't you think something called bisphenol S would act like something called bisphenol A? And I said, Brian, I'm not a chemist, but yes. We need to stop worrying just about BPA. We don't need to even worry about BPS. We don't need to worry about BPAF. We need to worry about this as a class of chemicals. We will never study any of them as well as we've studied BPA, and we don't really need to. Work from my group has shown that mice exposed to very low levels of BPS, levels that are considered safe by regulatory agencies, induce changes in the mouse mammary gland. You don't have to know much about what the mammary gland is supposed to look like to know that the animal on the left, the unexposed animal, looks very different from the animal on the right, the mammary gland. We've seen changes in the male mammary gland. And the male mammary gland is almost entirely unstudied. And yet, just as female breast cancer rates have increased over time, we know that male breast cancer rates are increasing as well. When we look at the mothers who were exposed only during the period of pregnancy and lactation, and look at how much functional tissue is in their mammary gland, that's all those clusters of purple cells in the mammary gland, we see less of them in the animals that are administered BPS. And what I'm not showing you here is we've seen the same effect in their daughters. They're making less milk. When we look at those daughters and how they act, I'm going to show you, please don't record this because some people get nervous about seeing mouse videos. But when we look at their behavior, what we see are anxiety-like behaviors. These are called stereotypies. It's a behavior that has absolutely no purpose. This mouse does this behavior all day long. We've seen this in BPA-exposed mice also. Now, the upside of this is that when time passes and this animal gets old, she's beautiful. She is a marathon runner. She is svelte on the inside. But I can't imagine what her brain looks like. And when we look at the behavior of those, not those crazy girls, because they won't mate. They will not stop long enough to mate. But we look at the girls who are acting normally and then see how do they behave when they become mothers. Some of what we have seen is disturbing behavior. This is a mother who gave birth, did not group her pups into a nest so they can't be kept warm. She never lactates with them, and she crushes them to death because she has such hyperactivity, such anxiety that she destroys her babies. Another chemical that we haven't spent a lot of time talking about, but is in that class of benzophenones, is oxybenzone. Oxybenzone's gotten a lot of attention recently because it's used in sunscreens, and we found that scientists have found that even at exceptionally low concentrations, it kills coral. So it's already been regulated or banned or not being sold, at least, in some small jurisdictions where the concern is that coral is already under attack from climate change. Let's stop introducing something else that will kill it, oxybenzone. To my knowledge, there's 2 jurisdictions that have stopped selling it in the stores in those towns. But we also know that oxybenzone is used in food packaging. It's used in inks and dyes. It's also used to prevent UV from entering into bottles and other plastic materials. It's also found in fabrics and clothing and upholstery because it helps keep the colors very, very bright, but it's shed from those materials when they're washed. We have found that mice that are exposed to oxybenzone during pregnancy and lactation, so the mothers, when we look in their mammary glands, weeks after exposure has stopped, we see changes in their mammary glands. So they are permanently affected by exposures that occurred during pregnancy and lactation. It's not just the babies we should worry about, it's the mamas too. When we look at their offspring, if we look at anogenital distance, Linda talked about this briefly last night. It's the distance really between the anus and the genitals, which is longer in males, shorter in females, but that distance is predictive of a male's lifelong health. His ability to make sperm, his ability to make quality sperm, his risk of testicular cancer, and all kinds of other things. We see in the males exposed to oxybenzone a shortening of anogenital distance. They're being feminized, but we're also potentially affecting their long-term reproductive health, something we need to look at. When we look at the girls exposed during development, we're also seeing effects on their mammary glands. And I'm not showing you, we see effects on the male mammary gland also after exposure to oxybenzone. I could not give you enough examples today because I have 12 minutes and they're going to yank me off the stage soon. But what I can tell you is we have enough data to know that estrogenic chemicals or other chemicals with hormone activity are affecting people. In many cases, we do have good human studies to draw causal relationships, or the human studies with the animal studies together are painting us a picture. And I just want to end by telling you how cautious we have to be about how we message about these things. This is a great study that was done years ago. They took the linings, they looked at people in China and Japan, I think it was just Japan, and their use of beverages from BPA-containing materials. With more exposure, with more consumption, they had more BPA in their bodies. Then the manufacturers changed the composition of the can coating, and it didn't matter how many drinks you had, the exposures went down. But what were they exposed to instead is a question that has never been answered in that study. When people have done big interventions, this was done at Silent Spring, exposures go way down, but they don't go away, which means we're being exposed from places we never anticipated. And we have to be really careful, because when scientists do intervention studies where they say, okay, we're going to keep you from being exposed to chemicals, and we're going to feed you, we're going to put you in this great place, and you're not going to be exposed at all, sometimes exposures go up. We don't know what we don't know. We have to be really careful about telling people, don't do this or don't do that and avoid this and avoid that, because we could be making some things worse without realizing it. I'll thank the beautiful people who do all my work, and I'll hopefully have time for questions at the end.